Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War, I guess a bit of an extra, sort of a hits and losses appendix video, where I'm going to look through three added Andrew Perpetual loss lists that he's just put up in one fell swoop here. As he says here, the losses I could identify for September the 28th, 29th, and October the 1st. So we did have one in between, but here are the missing ones. And I always find it interesting to go through these lists. You may or may not, you don't have to watch this, just to see, first of all, what the figures are like in terms of loss ratios, but also what kind of things are being lost on either side. Now, when we look at the loss ratios, this is exactly what the Ukrainians would want. Here's the first one, which has a sort of 4-to-1 loss ratios in total, Russian to Ukrainian losses. Combat asset losses, probably about a 4-to-1 as well. When we look at the next day, we've got pretty much the same sort of statistics, maybe a sort of 3-to-1 combat asset loss ratio. And then when we look at this third one, if you don't include the civilian losses at the bottom there, so just the blues, then that's probably a 2-to-1 loss ratio. Combat asset losses, actually probably a 3-to-1 Russian to Ukrainian. So without looking at the detail, all good news for the Ukrainians in terms of the Russians losing a lot more stuff than the Ukrainians. Now let's go to the first day here, and we'll look at Ukrainian losses to begin with. We have nothing too significant. Damage to destroyed ratio is good for the Ukrainians, so more damaged here than destroyed. APCs, of the 5 APCs lost, 4 of them are M113, so that's interesting. All Western provided vehicles, but not the newest either. IFVs are all BMPs, so old Soviet stuff, and there's an MTLB, an old Soviet era APC there as well. A couple of unknown MRAP. So nothing too significant at all in the losses for the Ukrainians there. Russian losses for this particular day, quite a bit of comms equipment and engineering vehicle. And if you look at the abandoned to destroyed ratio to damaged, it's much worse for the Russians here. So almost entirely destroyed or abandoned, with just a few damaged here and there. Artillery is often different. It's difficult to tell what the battle damage assessment is for artillery pieces. Couple of D30s, couple of Jets into A36Bs there. Pretty sizable bits of kit. And then coming to tanks, we have a range of tanks, T62, T72, T80, track garden sheds, etc., etc. Quite a few tanks in this list. We've got about, 10 tanks maybe, something like that. Infantry fighting vehicles, goodness me, well over 20 there. BMPs, BTRs, all the usual suspects in that, but pretty devastating ratio of destroyed and abandoned to damaged. And then APCs, usual culprits in that section as well. Quite a few four-wheelers, quite a few civilian vehicles and trucks as well. So nothing like crazy valuable, but just the mass of what Russia is losing compared to the Ukrainians for that list, that's bad news for the Russians. Now we go to the second day, and it's fairly similar ratios, as I said earlier. When we go to the browns and blacks versus the greys, both sides having pretty bad destroyed and abandoned ratio to damage there. With the Ukrainians, we start with one tank, a damaged Leopard 2A6 hit by an FPV drone. And then we have infantry fighting vehicles, including abandoned Marder, but otherwise BMPs. And then with the APCs, they're all Western provided, all made themselves. And Novator, they made themselves, M113 and Humvees. And MRAPs, Kirpi and the Kozak made themselves or provided by Turkey in the case of the Kirpi. Nothing too significant apart from the Leopard 2A6. They're not going to want to lose too many of them, as long as that can be recycled, I guess, recovered and reused again, then that's not too bad. For the Russians, quite a bit of surveillance and comms equipment. We have a number of D30s. There's 2 A65 Mr. B. That is I think a self-propelled howitzer there. Am I right? Yes. Tanks, we have normal range. I say normal, but actually a T55A thrown in. So this is a moment where we go, T55 used near the contact line. Does that signify that they're a bit desperate? Could well do. Like, you wouldn't expect to see a T55 destroyed in a battle in 2024. unless Russia were desperate for tanks. So that is a little nugget there that I think tells us something. Infantry fighting vehicles, usual culprits there, BMP 2s and 3s, and 1 as well, and some BTRs and BMDs, so quite a range. APCs, usual MTLBs thrown in there, most of these destroyed, and then quite a host of civilian vehicles to add to that as well. A lot of motorcycles, it's worth noting as well, which again, you know, we're trying to work out what story this tells us. When you have a lot of motorcycles added in, I think we can successfully say that the Russians are in a little bit of trouble with regard to what stuff they're using. Just trying to see from the day before whether there are motorcycles. Yep, a bunch of motorcycles and four-wheelers there. So again, tells us a bit of a story as to what's going on the front lines. Now, for the third day here, I presume this is the October the 1st one, we have quite a lot of combat asset losses for the Russians. But we're going to look at the Ukrainian losses first. Worth noting that there are some civilian vehicles hit here, and when I say civilians, driven by civilians, so that is, you know, arguably 6 war crimes there, potentially, especially when they drone drop bombs. I imagine that's going to be in the Kherson area, etc., etc. Right, looking at the actual military equipment, we have some comms equipment, a UGV, unmanned ground vehicle drone there for the Ukrainians, a couple of bits of artillery, a few tanks, T-64s, T-80, nothing too crazy. Infantry fighting vehicles include a destroyed Bradley, that's going to hurt a bit, and a YPR 765 that's been abandoned. That's the Dutch variant of the M113, which we have also in here. The YPR 765 is seen as an infantry fighting vehicle here, has a bit more armament on top as opposed to just the basic M113, just usually used to ferry troops around, sometimes used as a sort of Kazovac vehicle. So here we have a striker thrown in there, a destroyed one. The rest of these are Western, so quite a lot of Western vehicles here on this list when you go from infantry fighting vehicle. In fact, 100% is either made themselves or Western provided, from infantry fighting vehicles through APCs to MRAPs. So that tells you something, that they are using a lot more Western equipment than they were at the beginning of the war, as you would imagine. Then for the Russians, we have, okay, what's worthy of note here? When we look, and there is some very important things of note. So in the artillery section, we have 2 BM-21 Grads, multiple launch rocket systems were destroyed. Interestingly, I think on the stats coming from the General Staff for this morning, as pertaining to yesterday's losses, there were 8 multiple launch rocket systems lost in one day. Could be a record. I'll check that out when I do that video after this. But this is the really important bit. So yeah, 2 destroyed multiple launch rocket systems is going to hurt the Russians, although they have quite a few of those. M46. There are 4 M46 howitzers. We are and all of these are barrel destroyed as well. So, you know, I would say that's more than damage. These bad boys are going to need effectively the main part of them replacing. And do the Russians have those barrels to hand in the numbers they need? I don't know. But to lose 4 M46s here shows that they are using M46s a lot more. They are drawing really old bits of kit. I mean, this is what, 1950s howitzer, it's end of the Second World War howitzer. I don't know. Let's have a look. M46 howitzer. There we go. Right. So this is the Wikipedia page for it. First observed by the West in 1954, manufactured in 1950s. So yeah, not quite the end of the Second World War. Well, designed 1946, so just after the Second World War it was designed. That's probably why it's M46, designed from 1946 onwards. That's what it looks like. That's what a museum piece looks like, probably. But anyway, to lose 4 of them, I think, is a bit of a problem. Still got pretty good range, the M46. Let's see what the range is on here. Maximum firing range, so 27 kilometers unassisted. Assisted, obviously, if you've got like some kind of base bleed or some, better munition, then you can eke out some more distance on that. But 27 kilometers is fine. You know, that's going to do a better job, arguably, than the newer sort of D20s, 30s, or D30s. I would have thought. But anyway, that they're using these means that they're drawing them out from deep reserves, and that shows that they just are churning through stockpiles of equipment. Now, for tanks, there's a T90M destroyed here. That's their best tank, so losing that's going to hurt them. The breakthrough tank, as it's called. A number of other sort of various tanks there. Quite a few infantry fighting vehicles. Slightly better destroyed to damaged ratio on this day's figures. BMP 1s, 2s and 3s, and BTRs. Then with the APCs, most of these are MTLBs, which is fairly typical. And then the usual ATVs, all-terrain vehicles, quads and Desert Cross 1000-3, golf buggies, if you like, and other bits and pieces destroyed. So there are a few nuggets here that tell us a few things, that the Russians are possibly desperate for equipment. The T-55 and M46s being on the loss lists is interesting. A couple of multiple launch rocket systems being lost, but otherwise it's just a case of Russia losing a heck of a lot of equipment in comparison to the Ukrainians. Hopefully that was of some interest to you. Take care, guys, and I'm going to get on with today's hits and losses video.